So we're back on the other side of the table, and this time we're very, very pleased to welcome Jason Mellad. Jason, welcome
Hi,
to the
everyone.
show.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Great to see you. Great to see you. Now, Jason, I know from our previous conversations that there's going to be plenty for us to dive into, so I'm going to try and direct us to the most useful places. But where we always start with this podcast is your view on the market, and we're at the end of June 2024, so heading into the summer. I think, some people feel the market is warming up. Some people feel that there's still challenges out there. I think there's probably truth in both of those statements. But what's your view on where we are in biotech right now?
Yeah, I would say that the market is starting to slowly warm up.
Hmm.
It's a bit like the British summer this year. It's taken a while for the sunshine to reach us, but we're getting there. So you start to lose hope, and you think, oh, it's over and it's dark and
Yeah.
gloomy. But no, just when you think things are done, you start to see rays of sunlight, and we're moving in the right direction. I think the market is the same way. I have a feeling that we're never going to get back to what we were like pre-pandemic, but that's
Right.
not a bad thing. We need to make sure that we have the right companies at the right time going public. We need to get back to a healthy M&A environment when it comes to pharma and biotech as a
Hmm.
viable exit strategy for these younger startups. And we have to understand that not every opportunity that looks good on paper is going to be a robust business.
Right.
So rightly so, investors at all stages, from your angels and pre-seed all the way up through crossovers and your later stage, private equity, etc., are more cautious.
Yeah.
They were, let's say, a bit too enthusiastic that somehow magically tech would bring to biotech the same returns that they had in their
Yes.
own industry. And as much as data-driven science is really exciting and sexy, it is not enough to solve all of the problems. So let's go into the future, knowing the market is warming up, with a more considered eye when it comes to assessing opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And how unreasonable of them to expect proper returns from the 20, 50, $100 million that they're going to invest in
I
these
know.
companies.
Didn't somebody tell them?
But I think you're right. I think I think yes, there's more appetite from investors from what we can see, but I think as well, companies are figuring out how they need to run their business in order to be attractive for investors, right? And that's about running your business properly a lot of the time. Whereas with sort of the greatest of respect, that wasn't so important 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, so I think we've navigated that, and we should end up with better companies, right?
I think so. Separating the wheat from the chaff and all that. I think
Mm.
that back in the day when you had a really great idea, it was enough. You could give a smile and a wink and then go, oh, go on. There's so much capital, everything is flush, just give it a go.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we remember the SPAC debacle. I had a friend we used to call SPAC Man because every time there was a SPAC, he'd send us the article, but look at this SPAC, look how much they've raised off of nothing. And I said, it's a bubble, mate, it's a
Yeah, yeah,
bubble.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then when it burst, I was like, Pac-Man, what happened, SPAC Man?
Yeah.
So well, let's not get back to that. Let's stick with really robust offerings and force companies to truly validate their offering. And of
Mm.
course, some things are pre-revenue and you need to raise significant capital to get a drug to market. But if you have to fight that much harder, I don't think it's going to have a negative impact on
Yeah.
translation of science. If anything, it'll make sure that we have more capital for the best opportunities rather than spreading ourselves too thin.
Yeah, and that's a real challenge, isn't it? That there's very few organizations currently that have the resources to really take a project all the way through. That power is kind of concentrated in a few places, isn't it? And I think perhaps less raises, but of greater size, will help to redistribute that somewhat. Yeah.
Definitely.
And I suppose there's parallels with tech, as you say, right? In that, yes, there has been a bubble around AI, but not to the extent that the dot-com bubble was, because the caution is kind of still
Yeah.
there somewhat from that. And I guess you mentioned that you don't think we'll ever see it back to where it was in 2021. Is that kind of the parallel that you're drawing there?
It is, and I think it's a good thing. It'll be different. We'll have
Yeah.
a new problem to face in the future, I'm sure. I'm waiting for maybe quantum will take off now that
Yes.
AI is cooling down. So there's always something. I still remember when I was younger and it was nano. Everything was nano. Every company had nano in the title
Right.
because
Yeah.
nano was the future, it was going to solve everything until it didn't. And every year you could almost chart a new technology or new hype, and then suddenly it spawns multiple innovation. And most of those fail, but we keep moving forward in spits and spurts. So I would say, no, it will not go back, and that's a good thing. I
Hmm.
think that one of the exciting bits of tech bio was that data-driven play of taking that tech know-how and capabilities and applying it to bio, and it's moved us leaps and bounds forward. However, it was not a panacea.
Right.
And that's what people understand now. Just saying, I've got the best AI algorithm, and trust me, it can predict the best target and what's going to succeed in clinic. Trust me, trust me, trust me. Trust only takes you so far. And now
Mm-hmm.
we're realizing that AI is an incredible tool to help med chemists, biologists, physicists, etc., get the most out of their innovation as opposed to a replacement or a cure-all.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We had someone on the podcast recently who said the algorithm's great. Show me how good your data is.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
that's kind of the reality that we're shifting to, isn't it?
It's true. Rubbish in, rubbish out.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely. So, and you look at this whole kind of equation, I suppose, with multiple hats on, Jason. So you are an investor in your own right, but then also through running Start Codon, you work with founders to help them to bridge that gap to investment, and have, lots of sort of connections within the investment community as well, linking them to great companies. So there's probably various different ways you could answer this next question. But I suppose when you're looking at an investment yourself, um, what are the things that are most important to you, and what are the things that you need to see to get excited about something?
So I've got a couple of different hats for this, as you said. From a pre-seed investment standpoint, so
Hmm.
much is the team
Hmm.
is an outsized factor in how we assess an opportunity because the best team in the world with some rubbish tech will find a way to make it work. They'll invent
Right.
something new, they'll in-license something, they'll do a deal, they will make it work as an incredible team. But if you have great tech with all the nature papers and high impact kudos and everything else, but the team is rubbish, it will fail.
Yeah.
So at these early stages, when it's super risky, we think, is this a team that we can back? Do we believe that they can figure it out with our help and support? Great, we're going for it. Then the next consideration, of course, would be the tech and the market opportunity, the competitive landscape, all the things you do in diligence. But we really emphasize the team because there's not so much buffer in the early days.
Mm,
You need someone who can execute, has a strong track record, and is open to critique and is humble enough to understand what their limitations are and take on board that critique. Because, quite frankly, and this is my favorite article to cite, it was in the Harvard Business Review years ago. Do you want to be rich or do you want to be king? I mention it all the time. I don't
okay.
get commission for anyone listening.
Yeah.
Do you want to be rich or do you want to be king? And the study was looking retrospectively at success in founders and companies, and they found that those who wanted to be king, as in it was about control and kind of megalomania or narcissism, those companies fail. You might
That's
look at some of the
interesting.
big names and think, oh, I'm going to be the next Elon Musk. That's not the template you should be following.
Yeah.
If you want to be rich, it's about everybody coming together. The best person for the job is employed. You work as a team. And if you're no longer the right person to lead a company, you eagerly step aside and bring somebody in to take it forward because
Yes.
together you'll be successful. So we really look at that dynamic early on.
Yeah. So that point around, and that's a really useful way to look at it. Actually, I really like that. Do you want to be rich or king? It's a nice image. Um, and the point you make about being able to accept feedback and critique is crucial, and I guess people at any experience level can do that. If you were a founder, or if you were talking to a group of founders that perhaps were less experienced and therefore didn't have that track record and that execution that you're talking about, what what could they be doing to make their team more attractive to investors? Because I think, the team is the most important thing, is something that's often said. I think a lot of founders sometimes interpret that as, yeah, well, we're all really smart. Uh, and that's important, but it's not everything, right?
And that is true. And I'm sure their parents told them all the time how clever they were. And that's led to a whole host of other problems we can talk about in another
Hmm.
podcast. But
Hmm.
what are some practical things they can do? I always say start with a self-assessment. And if you don't feel you have the tools or the objectivity to assess yourself, find people you trust who won't just blow, sunshine up your you know what, who
Yeah.
will tell you the truth. Like these are the things you're really good at. Here are the things that you're not so great at. And then you think, okay, I've got this personal gap analysis. Maybe I'm deeply technical, but I don't understand the commercial. Maybe I'm come up with great ideas, but I'm not very organized. Whatever it may be, have that honest conversation with people that can really help you assess it. And then you think, how am I going to solve this? Some things are personal improvement. and there are ways to improve it. So, for example, I used to really struggle with public speaking. As
Mm,
much as I had great ideas, I would have almost paralytic stage fright at sometimes, get panic
right.
attacks and sweat. So I said, I'm going to force myself to speak publicly as much as I can at every opportunity, big or small, until I get comfortable. And now I love it. But it
Yes.
took effort. So that's something I personally recognize. And I said, it's holding me back. Other things, I think, wow, finances, legal, I need to learn enough to understand and enough to be dangerous, but
Hmm.
also recognize that as soon as I'm able to, I will bring in somebody who's a legal expert. I will bring in someone who's a regulatory and financial expert and so on and so forth. So that's the other aspect of the team. What are you doing to improve yourself personally, but also recognizing bringing other people into the tent is going to be essential.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so that focus on development and not just making your science or your technology better, but really improving because a lot of running a business is about developing your perspective as much as it is developing your skills, right? And it's not always about those hard skills.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, interesting. And then so I suppose looking that's at the very early stage. That's at the sort of pre-seed, very risky stage. And then looking at the work you do with companies, perhaps through Start Codon and helping them to take that next stage of investment. How do you think the lens shifts at that point in terms of what people are looking for?
Then it comes down to execution
Hmm.
and the opportunity in terms of the attractiveness of the market and what the business model is. So, from execution, has the company achieved the key milestones to reduce the risk and the opportunity and increase the likelihood of not only it being successful ultimately, but also securing additional finance? Because let's face it, every investor wants to know another investor is coming after them to
Right.
increase the valuation, not inflate the valuation, but to increase it to a reasonable, healthy amount.
Yeah.
So, that's why I often tell people raise 2 rounds in advance. If I'm pre-seed, you should be talking to Series A investors as well as seed. Most people, they leave it too long,
Yes.
so always engage early, and they're myopic. So I want to see that they've gone out at a pre-seed company, spoken to Series A investors and say, I'm not pitching you because I recognize I've done my homework that you're Series A. I'm far too early for you. But I want to know in 3 years' time, what is it that you want me to have accomplished so that you would take an interest? Most Series A investors and beyond are more than happy to give
Yes.
that advice. If you go to them pitching for capital, they'll say, but you're way too early. That's the easy cop out answer from VCs. If you go and say, I know I'm early, but I want your advice on what I need to do, they will give you a laundry list and a lot
Yeah.
of helpful insights from them and people in the network. Then you take that feedback and go to seed investors and say, hey, I'm a pre seed company. I want your seed capital to achieve X, Y, and Z because I know the Series A investors want to see that. So I've got that feedback. I know what my pharma partners want to see if that's your route to market. I know what the biotech or the investors want to see. Give me the seed capital to achieve it, and then we're in a great position
Yeah.
for the Series A. So always raise 2 rounds in advance. So when I'm thinking about what companies are doing now, I'm thinking, what do they need to accomplish and the likelihood they'll accomplish it in order to raise more capital and get their product to market.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, and I suppose if you've then been able to show that you've executed on those early milestones, that's then the proof that you can go and do it. So you're making this an easy decision for people. It's clear what needs to happen. That's been validated, perhaps not formally, but informally. And you've shown that, okay, you haven't executed that bit yet, but you've executed this first part. And yeah.
Exactly. And if you think about my philosophy on companies is Start Codon has a very large, healthy portfolio of about
Hmm.
28 opportunities. They're all products. And the
Right.
customer is, in our case, another investor. So what do we need to do to make
Yes.
our products attractive to that investor? What is the unmet need of that investor? They need to invest their capital because they have to deploy capital. They want
Mm.
to make X amount of return, so on and so forth. They have a laundry list of things that are attractive to them. So you understand that, and then you prepare your product, in this case, a startup, so that they're ready for that investment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right about the myopia part of it. I think there's also maybe a bit of insecurity around that, right? That, oh, well, they won't want to talk to me because I'm too early, but they're building their deal flow from their point of view. So it's worth half an hour of a conversation. And you never know, they may well turn around and go, well, actually, you should speak to, it's not for us, you're right, but you should speak to these three people. And suddenly these become very warm introductions that you're generating, right?
But the rules of BD that I often try to tell people as well is I think it takes 3 discussions to really get to a point where you're ready. The first discussion, you should be primarily in listening mode.
Mm.
I call it my 80-20 rule. 20% you talking, 80% you listening. Because just like the VC being your customer, if you're a startup raising, you want to understand what they want and what they need.
Yes.
Most startups, they meet you and they go immediately into pitch mode, like, I've got an idea and it's clever, and I'm going to throw it at you to convince you. And it's a bit like, whoa, you don't even understand
Yeah,
what
yeah.
I'm about. The number of times people have pitched flying cars or the equivalent to me, and I say, first of all, I'm a pre-seed life science company. Why are you pitching me a Series A electric car like idea? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But they're so keen on just spray and pray and pitching, they don't think first to understand what it is that I want and need.
Mm.
Then your second conversation, after you've had a roundabout feedback, you say it's more of a 50-50. And you go, okay, thank you so much for our first conversation. I think what you're looking for is this. Is that correct? And then you're pressure testing. And maybe some of the things you got correct and other things they refine and say,
Yeah.
actually, that's not quite what I meant. It's your third conversation that you're ready to pitch. And you go, right. Now, not only have I taken on board what you've told me, it shows that I'm a good listener. It shows that I'm flexible and I can grow and evolve. And you're now a part of my journey because I've incorporated your ideas. So you've got skin in the game. Suddenly you've
Yes.
got their buy-in.
Yes.
They're interested in what you're doing. That's when you're ready to pitch if they're at the right level. But most people
Yeah.
don't do that. They go in for the hard sale at the beginning and they fall flat on their face.
And to your point, they're not pitching the most important thing, right? Which is them as a team, them as a founder. And if you're thinking about who's willing to listen, actually that process is pitching, but it's just a different a different part of what you're offering that you're pitching.
And it's surprising, subconsciously and consciously, the things that we pick up on. So,
Mm.
for example, if somebody has done their research on Start Codon and who we are, that is, it blows my mind because most people don't. They
Right.
just assume, well, I saw something online, you've got money and I need money, so let me pitch at you. I rather when they show up and go, the reason why I'm pitching to Start Codon are for these reasons. I've looked at your portfolio and this looks really interesting. I know that you guys have this background and that we would be a right fit for you. Here's how we could work together to make this successful.
Mm-hmm.
That's the pitch, not, hi, my name is so and so. I'm raising 500,000 pounds to do blank. Please give me the money. You think, okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. No, interesting. And that leads us nicely on to what will probably be the bulk of this conversation, the most common mistakes that you see people making. So
Yeah.
you've kind of touched on one of them there, just the kind of the cold pitch almost. But be interested in, I'm sure you've seen lots. What are the things that you see most often?
Oh, wow. Don't have enough time in this podcast. So I'll just choose a couple. I'll choose a couple. I think that, well, common mistake that's a pet peeve of mine. If I've had one conversation with you, do not put my image on your slide deck and say that I'm an advisor because it will come back to me. And they'll
Mm,
say, oh, well, Jason advised us or Sir Codon advised us, and they stick the logo in their deck. And I'm thinking, we had a brief meeting at a conference over coffee. I am not an advisor. I do not condone any of this. I am not here to vet your idea. So
yes.
if you speak to somebody, at least at a minimum, ask if you can include their image and their name in your deck as an advisor, informal or otherwise. Most people will say yes, but do ask them first. And the
Mm,
number of times I've seen people say things like, look at all my partners. And I say, so you've got this pharma on here. What do you mean they're a partner? Well, we have a CDA in place with them. So I said, no, 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 no. A confidentiality agreement to discuss a pilot study with a pharma does not equate to their logo in your deck that you've secured a partnership.
yes.
Also, if you filed a provisional patent application that has not been prosecuted and granted, do not tell me that you have a patented technology
Okay.
because you don't. You have
Yeah.
filed an application with extremely broad terms to protect your amazing idea, and yet somehow you think that equates to having a patent. It does not. You're
Mm-hmm.
many years away from prosecution, so please be honest about that. Oh, I could keep going. I got another one real quick. One that I think is also people don't, they need to know their numbers,
Mm,
understand intimately your burn rate, your cash out date, when you think you'll be technically insolvent, the balance sheet insolvent because of your outstanding liabilities. Know that by heart because I will ask. And
yes.
also understand the competitive landscape better than I do. If you come to me and put up some MBA style quadrant of everybody's rubbish, and look, we're in the upper right because we're perfect, and I Google in front of you competitors that you've never heard of, there's a problem. Not that you have to
Mm,
know everything, but I would like to think that you would do the basics
yes.
and know. And most importantly, I'm not interested in you giving me another chart of here are all the green tick boxes because these are the parameters where I'm perfect and all my competitors are not. Give me something that I can actually go on. Admit when your competitors are better than you.
Right.
I'd rather understand that and how you're going to close that gap
Yeah.
than you pretend that, oh, we're the best ever. You don't have to be the first or the only to do something. Tell me how you will become the best, how I can help you become the best. Recognize your strengths, but also what are some of the gaps and weaknesses that need to be filled. I'll stop
Yeah.
there because those are some of my top ones.
No, those are really important. So I think the first half of that was all about it's about honesty really, isn't it? And being transparent about what you're saying, not obfuscating the truth. And I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but anyway,
Yeah,
um, but like you say, yes, you want to present your company in the best light. However, it's a very small community, and if you are taking liberties with the truth, that will come back to you. Um,
yeah,
because yes, it's all very well putting stuff on the presentation, but then someone's probably going to ask if it's up there. Someone's going to ask you a question about it, or you're at least opening the floor for them to ask you a question about it, right? In
yeah,
which case, the best that's going to happen is you give a pretty weak answer and you're unconvincing. The worst that's happening is you come across as untruthful,
yes,
which erodes the trust. Um, the point around the competitive analysis is really interesting. I think it's something that people don't really understand very well, and they think it's an exercise in convincing people that they're the best, as you say. But how could you possibly be better than this billion-dollar company with 3,000 employees when there's three of you, and you might have a better idea, but there's going to be things that they're but this is a successful company over here. There's going to be things that they are really good at. But to your point, it's yeah, what is your plan to compete? But also, I think if you take competitive analysis seriously, it really helps you to understand, okay, well, actually, we can't compete with them on these things, but where we can position ourselves is here, and this is a gap, and we've identified this gap because we've identified all the boundaries of this gap and where people sit already, and that's
yeah.
just as critical, right?
Well, exactly. When somebody tells me they're the first or the only, coming back to
Yeah.
that point, then I go, well, then either the market's rubbish, it doesn't exist,
Mm,
or you haven't done your homework. Because I've never met anything, and especially in today's world, that somebody else hasn't tried. I'd rather you say, people have tried it, it's failed for these reasons, but now is the time and we're the team to make it work because we've learned from their failures. Or to the point you're raising earlier, the market is quite could be a crowded market, means there's a healthy, competitive
mm.
landscape, and then clearly the market exists. But this is the niche that we're going to own, and maybe those competitors might be a path to exit for us. Or maybe
Yes.
they won't innovate in this space because either they're technically unable or they're too busy commercializing their products. Because we know how large corporates like to be in the product sales mode as opposed to necessarily innovation. So you could say, right, we'll own this niche, we'll grow it, it'll help us build. We might compete with them someday, they might acquire us someday. Maybe we'll acquire them someday. But
Yeah.
at least chart out for us a very logical and honest, as you said, view of what the world looks like. Because that's the most exciting thing to an investor is it's always great to have competition because it proves you're not crazy,
Yeah, that's true.
right?
Yeah.
That's the thing. And there's competition doesn't have to be another corporate. It doesn't even have to be an academic institution. It could just be the norm.
Mm-mm-mm.
Sometimes the adoption hurdles are the things that you should be flagging the most of like, well, I know this is something people need, but they don't want it. I learned that in my early days when I was doing innovation consultancy. We were working on
Right.
fast-moving consumer goods at Biotech, and I loved it there. And one of the things I learned early on was your want state versus your need state.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people need things, like we need food to live, but we don't necessarily want to eat everything. Like my kids don't always want to eat their vegetables.
Right.
They
Yeah.
need to, but they
Yeah.
don't want to. So if you're developing the vegetable startup that everybody needs, but nobody actually wants to buy what you're selling or developing, where do you go from there? So it's things to consider like that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, as you say, the more you can look at what you're doing as a product that somebody in the end is going to have to buy and probably someone else is going to have to use, right? In the healthcare world, it's probably two at least two customers. Um, then you can start to position it in that way. And just because there's an unmet medical need doesn't mean anybody's going to prescribe or take your drug.
Exactly. Or use your diagnostic test
Yeah.
or tap into your digital health platform. The number of times I've heard people say this innovation sounded really good, but they never did market testing. So the nurses or practitioners don't want to use it. Or there's not enough room for your monstrosity of a machine in the hospital lab.
Hmm.
So yes, it works well, but you can't have it as point of care if it's bigger than the beds itself. So
Yeah.
right? But everyone thinks, oh, but wouldn't it be great to have it? Da, 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 da. And you go, well, actually, have you really really considered rather, what it is that people want and need? And I often find that people show you what they need and they tell you what they want.
Hmm.
So you've got to observe them in their natural environment, right?
Yeah,
Because you ask
absolutely.
the typical person, what is it that you need? They go, da, 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 da. Usually it's just things that they want. And then you
Yeah.
observe them and say, actually, what you really need is this. And then you get a better understanding of their habits and how to actually develop solutions that make sense.
Yeah, because I think if they knew they needed it, they'd have figured out how to get it already, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And
Exactly.
it's finding those things that they don't realize they need, but actually will make a huge difference. And it's those ideas, isn't it, that no one else has come up with this solution, but when you tell it to someone who uses that stuff, they go, "Yeah, obviously that would be great." And it's the things that seem simple on reflection that get the best adoption, right?
100%.
Yeah. I remember it's a really interesting point on the practicalities. I remember being at a digital health conference long time ago, 2015, 2016, something like that. So early stages of digital health. And hopefully infrastructure has moved on since then. But there was all these companies pitching, some amazing companies. I think Babylon were there at the time, and some companies. The
Ah,
guy who ran Watson for Europe, but Watson Health for Europe was there, and a whole bunch of different companies. And there was a guy stood up, and I think he was the medical director for the group of hospitals that Adam Brooks is part of. So I think it's Cambridge University hospitals. There's three or
yeah.
four different hospitals that's part of
Mm,
it. And he said, "Look, some of this stuff sounds incredible, and I've been amazed seeing these innovations that are coming through. But what you've got to understand is that once I get 15 meters into the hospital, I don't have any Wi-Fi reception anymore.
yeah.
And so half of these things just aren't going to work in the hospital." And it's those sorts of things that trip you up, right?
Well, there's a great example from Bradford. I was
Hmm.
visiting well, last year, I would say this time last year, and one of the medical directors there looking at innovation opportunities in one of the local hospitals told me about something they've been using in care homes, which was a brilliant innovation, very simple but effective, that of course VC said is not a venture backable idea. And basically, they identify that dehydration in patients, particularly those with dementia, is a challenge.
Mm.
And it's hard to keep track in a busy day, busy ward, busy care home, who's drinking what and when. So they came up with a very simple solution. They had a glass on a simple scale, like a 5 quid weighing scale. They would fill it up with water every day. And then they had another scale on the catheter bag. And they would look how much liquid was going into each patient and how much was coming out. And over the course of a week, they, on an Excel spreadsheet, could pick out who was getting enough fluid and who wasn't, and then make sure that they got them extra fluids, maybe IV. And they saw a massive improvement in
Wow.
terms of comorbidities and the ability to get over infection and all kinds of things just by making sure they were properly hydrated. No AI, no machine
No.
learning, just a spreadsheet, something you could buy on Amazon, a simple weighing scale, a
Yeah.
glass, and off you go.
Yeah. And you're not relying on an app that people have to update
Nope,
themselves and all this kind of,
exactly.
yeah. Yeah.
Low
Yeah.
tech is super simple. They even had at one point, they told me like a flip chart by the bedside where you could just
Right.
write it in by hand. If you didn't have access to a laptop, you could put it in the laptop later. Simple, simple things.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. I think, there's a habit of overcomplicating these things sometimes, isn't there? Because I guess people think that's what investors want to see, that they're not interested in the simple solutions, or it seems too simple, like how are you going to make any money out of it? But
Yeah.
people pay for convenience as well.
They do, and I think we need to get back to learning how businesses are run.
Hmm.
We have this culture where we're so enamored with this world of VC, and I
Yes.
say that as with my investor hat on,
Yes.
and it's not serving us well. The number of times everyone goes for the big press release and how much did they raise, and somehow that's external validation that they're amazing because the VCs love them. The VCs are amazing, so I'm amazing by proxy, and it's all a nonsense. There are
Yeah.
plenty of really robust businesses that are doing amazing things and having an impact that have never raised a dime of venture capital.
Yeah,
Not
and
a single cent.
they've built slowly over 20 years or 25 years, and yes, scaling quickly is important when you're taking a drug to market and you've got to beat the race and all that kind of thing. But yeah, there's this almost forgotten tranche of businesses that are just really well run, that are providing good solutions, right?
Yeah, and then you end up putting in loads of cash in the ones that are moving fast and breaking things, and you wonder why they they wasted
They
all their
break
money.
things.
Yeah, they broke things. Well, you told them to move, they move fast and they broke
Yeah.
things. So I think the next generation of, let's say, startup founders and VCs, there needs to be a reckoning about this model about
Mm,
1 in 10 companies will succeed and 1 in 10 successes is a unicorn. That's not sustainable. That it's just, it cannot be the case that, well, we just accept that most of the companies will fail and the money's gone and it's been spent. It doesn't sit right
yeah,
with me. There has to be a better way.
yeah, agree. And I guess final question, Jason, then. In this new market that we're now in, and hopefully will be in now, where there needs to be quality of company and quality of plan and quality of founder, and not just quality of product, right? The other things that are just as important. What and this might be stuff you're advising people on in Start Codon and in the other things that you do. What advice would you give to people who are out there raising money in biotech right now? If there was one thing you could leave them with, what would that be?
I would say don't lose faith
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because it's really particularly challenging right now. But if you're listening to this podcast, you're listening to advisors, you're doing everything you possibly can that you feel is the right thing to do, then just keep on pushing. And I think you'll have a breakthrough. It may be that you ultimately don't get funding, and maybe that's the right choice. That's just life.
Right.
But if you are staying true to yourself, you have a really exciting proposition, you're surrounding yourself with great advisors, and you're doing all the right things, it may take twice as long as it used to, but you will get there. So persevere and don't lose faith.
Yeah. And I suppose along with that, you're not always going to get feedback, are you, with every rejection, but try and figure out as much as you can. If you were rejected, why was that? Was it just not a good fit? In which case, do you need to refine who you're targeting, or was there something about the pitch that didn't resonate, or is there, what are the reasons? What are the themes of the feedback that you're getting? Because
Yeah.
your first pitch is probably going to be your worst one, right?
Yeah,
If
well,
you keep
exactly.
improving them as you go along.
And also, let's challenge every investor listening to
Mm,
always give objective, constructive feedback. The best VCs I've ever met do that. Even for companies that are nowhere near investment ready, they will always give that feedback. And it's so valuable. Just take 5, 10 minutes to do more than say you're too early.
yes.
Makes
Yeah.
all the difference.
Absolutely. Well, Jason, thank you so much for joining us. Really useful conversation as always. Um, and yeah, have a great day.
Thanks, Tom. It's been my pleasure.